Thank you for joining us during this meeting of the Norfolk School Board. Today we will receive the superintendent's recommended operating budget for 2013-2014 school year. And we are pleased that this presentation this afternoon will be offered live on Channel 47 as well as our Norfolk Public Schools website. Before we get to that item on the agenda this afternoon, we have 3.02, another item of business to take care of, and that's a school board policy review. Of course, as we all know, periodically the school board reviews policies as recommended by the Virginia School Board Association to ensure that our policy manual is in alignment with the Virginia Code and other legal requirements. There are two items that we've tabled a couple of times that I'm hoping tonight we can take care of rather quickly. Under 3.02, those items are policy GDB, dealing with support staff and employment status, and then policy LC, dealing with charter schools. I've had an opportunity to meet with staff to get clarity on both of those items, and I think the approach, and I mentioned this in our last work session, the approach we want to take is to first of all begin with an understanding of the current policy that we have in Norfolk Public Schools, what the VSBA is recommending, what that impact would be upon the current policy, if any, in terms of that revision if we were to accept it, and what the recommendation of the administration is and their rationale. Then we can engage in informed discussion around it and make a decision as whether or not to adopt the revision that is recommended by VSBA, or to leave our policy as it stands in Norfolk. Okay. The first one, of course, deals with support staff employment status, and I know that Mr. Cloud and Dr. Birdsong are prepared to help us understand what the current policy is and what implications the recommended revision would have. Dr. King?
Chairman Houston, members of the board, as you have stated, the review consisted of policies GDB, school support staff employment status, also LC, charter schools, and policy review to reflect amendments, in addition to LCE, which also reflects charter school application addendums. We will begin with support staff employment status, GDB, which really centers on the delivery of due process in hiring and release of support staff. With that said, Dr. Birdsong.
Dr. Houston, Dr. Robinson, Dr. King, members of the board, good afternoon again. Before we get started, I want to introduce to you Frank Scott, who is the Senior Coordinator of Human Resources. He staffs our classified position, so I asked him to join me this afternoon, so thank you for allowing us to do that. If you could turn your attention to policy GDPD, that is our existing policy, and the purpose of this policy is that it basically outlines discipline and dismissal procedures for classified support staff, and we define support staff as personnel or employees who need not hold a license issued by the Virginia Board of Education in order to obtain their positions. This category includes but is not limited to non-licensed administrative, clerical, maintenance, transportation, food services, and paraprofessional positions. Upon reviewing both policies, we quickly noticed that there's not a major difference between the policy recommended by VSBA and our existing policy, GDPD. The primary difference is 15 days versus 14 days for notification for dismissal. Our current policy requires 2 calendar weeks for us to notify support staff of dismissal without cause. And the VBSA or the VSBA is recommending 14 days. And so that's the primary difference between the two policies. My staff and I, we have reviewed the policy, and at this time we would not recommend that we adopt the VSBA's policy because we have a policy that really already addresses what they're asking us to take a look at this time.
And I think it's the opposite. You said that our current policy, I believe, is 14 days, and they are.
That is correct, and theirs is 15.
Their
recommendation is 15, which is 1 additional day.
Any discussion or questions?
Just clarification. So I thought the VSBA policy was recommending but you could never apply again.
And our policy reads the same way, Mr. Jordan. In
where
the
am I
third
missing that?
sentence, it says support classified personnel who are removed from employment for just cause by the superintendent shall be ineligible thereafter for employment in any school or duty station within the school system.
Yeah, so I think when we discussed this previously, we were going to have some conversation, some explanation. Apparently right now it's just blanket, so it applies to any circumstance. And so a person who is dismissed for cause, 20 years later, rehabilitates whatever the circumstance is and still can.
And we did have that discussion,
Yeah,
actually.
so the policy, I guess, is fine, but I still think we need to, at least I would like to see some clarification as to why it's a blanket policy like that.
Well, let me offer this quickly. One of the things when we discussed that the superintendent mentioned is that if a person is terminated for just cause, and that if the administration has done due diligence and depending upon the nature of the offense or reason for termination, that if the rationale was legitimate and valid, that it wouldn't be a reason to turn around and rehire the person,
right,
if indeed they were terminated for just cause. So that was the explanation, and it certainly makes sense to me. But certainly we welcome discussion and feedback. Your thoughts?
I'll offer additional comments as the board considers this particular policy. As a representative of the administrative side, the interest for us centers on the fact that we must ensure that if we are going to recommend termination, that the indicators around termination are major indicators, and such that that issue never presents itself. And so that's cleanup that we're in the process of doing with our due process that we are going to provide before we bring a recommendation for termination. So, and that's how we plan to address that or rectify that concern. Anything else?
Questions or comments? So the recommendation of the administration is that we would not accept the revision recommended by the VSBA, but leave our policy as it is, and it's on the consent agenda as such. So is there any opposition to that? Okay, thank you. Okay, the next policy, of course, deals with the charter schools, and Mr. Cloud is prepared to share information relative to that to help us understand what our current policy is and then what the recommendation is. Dr. King?
Chairman Hughes, members of the board, we of course entered into a review for LC related to charter schools in addition to LCE related to charter schools, with the intent to clearly articulate steps and criteria involved in Norfolk Public Schools' acceptance and review of charter applications and petitions, also to ensure alignment with our strategic plan and to ensure alignment as it relates to improved student achievement. So that's the intent of the policy that you will hear in reference to discussion this afternoon, evening. Dr. Cloud. Mr. Cloud.
Norfolk, as you saw in the last policy, a certain amount of policies that the VSBA recommends, Norfolk doesn't necessarily adopt something, but adopts a modified version. When the public charter school policy, when the statutes came about and the first model policies were established by the VSBA, the school board at that time decided to have its own policy, and I wrote it some time ago. What has been before the board before was the VSBA recommendation, which is changing their policy based on some recent changes to the statute. I took Norfolk's current policy and went through and updated it. It had to be updated more than the VSBA because it's gone longer without a revision. But I went through and brought it up to what I think is all the requirements of the statute as a possible alternative to the VSBA, the VSBA version. As far as the law goes, the content to the extent it's dictated by statute, is all the same. I would say in the Norfolk version, it went a little more elaborately into, because I was requested to do that, into what would be looked at in terms of whether or not to accept a charter application, as well as, if the question came up afterwards, whether to revoke a charter application or to renew a charter application. Other than that, the main difference is in A2, which is a paragraph that actually is based on a resolution that the board in 2000 did, that school board, which is essentially just meant to emphasize what circumstances the school board would not charter a school. And I've left that in there. That is something unique to Norfolk. The VSBA has nothing like that as far as I know. No other division that I'm aware of does. Other than that, everything else is, there was some wordsmithing that I just noticed as I went through, but everything else, to the extent I changed it, was meant to bring it up to date with some of the statutory requirements that have been imposed by the General Assembly in the past 5 years or so.
So again, the major difference between our policy at A2 and the VSBA, restate that part for me, please.
That the major difference is, one, we have this provision that sets out circumstances in which the school board of the city of Norfolk would not charter a school. That's the paragraph that talks about diversity, diverting scarce funds, personnel, and other resources. It has 3 different subsections to it.
Right.
And then the other would be that it goes into more detail in terms of, in the sections dealing with criteria for approving a charter school, also criteria for revoking a charter, and criteria for re-upping a charter. If a charter school if a school was chartered, they have to, it can't be for longer than 5 years, and if they want to continue, then they have to be, the board has to consider.
And in your opinion right now, the state's version, VSBA's version, is more lenient than the current Norfolk version. Is that?
It's getting pretty, subtle there. I would say the tone of it is probably more lenient.
Okay.
But as far as what has to be put into a charter school policy, the Norfolk version, as I've updated it, has everything that the state requires.
So the recommendation of the administration is to keep the Norfolk policy as is. Is that correct?
Reflecting the updates that would bring us up to standard.
Right.
Because
As per the draft that I did, the
Right.
revised draft.
Okay. All right. Yes. Dr. Stewart? Very good.
Cloud, in what was given to us, there was an attachment LCZ-A. It was an application that was being recommended. This document that was being considered is not part of what we have now. Is that correct?
Well, you actually have 3 documents.
Not the existing Norfolk policy, but what we were asked to accept, the VSBA policy.
Yeah, I think they had 3, and our Norfolk has 3. It has a regulation which is included as part of the policy, and
our
has
application would not reflect their application.
That's correct.
It would accomplish what we want to accomplish, but not be there. The reason why I mention that, and this is for later reading, I would like you to read the purpose as stated in their LCZ-A, and school board members may wish to. I've looked beyond with more than a cynical and critical eye to what I see going on with charter schools in Virginia. More than a cynical eye, and this purpose statement was very shady to me, and shenanigans that are going on frighten me. So I give that to you to alert you to the way that things can be done in a very tricky way sometimes to begin to subvert free and public education for all. That's just a comment. Thank you.
Thank you. Other thoughts?
Just
Mr. Jordan?
a couple of points of clarification. In the, I guess it's the state code that says that at least one half of the public charter schools within the division shall be for at-risk students. Is that correct?
Yes.
So they're, if I'm understanding that correctly, they are encouraging public charters that are exclusive for at-risk students, as by the definition that they have?
Yeah. There's a section that, I mean, if you only have one, you don't have to choose to have it.
Right.
But essentially, if you charter one, then, and it's not for special needs students, then the next one, you have to, if you're going to do another one.
Right, so
because you
it's-
have to keep the percentage 50%.
So it's almost, but it's in essence encouraging the concentration of at-risk students in the school.
Yes,
Is that correct?
and there are other provisions in the statute that sort of follow those lines too. That the General Assembly
I think we need to
has
get that.
always favored that for whatever reason.
I need to get that changed. And related to our current policy, this section 2, that says the school board shall not approve an application, and clause 2, remove high-performing students from other public schools in the district. In a charter application, how would one determine if a high-performing student or family chose to go to the charter? I mean, how do you monitor that?
Actually, that really relates to a charter application that centers solely on test results or student achievement data to pinpoint students that are exceeding standard, for example, only, to create a charter school that may be deemed a high-performing charter and only attract students that are honor roll students or students that have a certain score at a certain percentile ranking and that kind of thing. And that's the intent of that.
So if someone were to apply for a charter, and for some reason we decided to approve the charter, are you saying that if a family who happened to have a high-performing student wanted to place their child in that charter, we wouldn't allow for that?
Oh, absolutely. That's not the case. This means that if your application that's submitted is focused solely on only accepting students that score at the 95th percentile or the 99th percentile, or students that are exceeding standard, does not mean that students that exceed standards cannot be applicants for a particular charter, but the charter cannot solely focus on only accepting students that are quote-unquote high performing.
When I read the language, I don't think it's that clear.
That's the intent of it. That's the intent of the
Is that
statement.
from the legal language? Is that?
Yes, I mean, I invented all of that.
That's what I'm asking you. That's what I'm asking you.
The other thing I was going to say is also, if the board, if an application came along where there was any interest at all, it's an ongoing process. The board doesn't have to approve any application that it doesn't feel it has enough information to do so. So that my idea of the process was that whatever inquiry the board might have in terms of an applicant, it could be made before there would ever be anything like a final draft of a contract, and it be prepared to be approved by the board.
I just want to make sure I'm clear. So if it says the school board shall not approve, and then it goes into a series of ors, one of the or is shall not approve a charter if its establishment would remove high-performing students from other public schools in the district. And so I understand what you're saying, Dr. King, but I'm not sure that what I hear you describe is what this language describes. And so therefore, you almost would immediately deny any application because it's possible that some family may choose to attend the charter. So it would seem to me that if the language that you're describing, Dr. King, is what we're really trying to achieve, why wouldn't we just make the language specific to that.
Sure, I clearly understand, but I am certain that that is the intent of 2 subcategory B in terms of the purpose of having the phrases that are there present. If there's consideration for modifying the wording, I guess that's a board issue in terms of making it clarified.
Certainly modify.
And I think the thing that's important for the board to remember here as well is that the board maintains total authority here, because once we, as an administrative staff, once we go through our procedures for review, then we simply bring recommendations to you based on the policy,
Right.
and then you will enact your review to determine whether you approve a petition or not. But it's certainly within the authority and purview of the board to ask for modification and wording if that's necessary.
I do understand Mr. Jordan's concern. Well, let me say first, I understand the spirit of number 2. And I think what I hear you saying, Mr. Jordan, that if we were to spell out more specifically that we shall not approve an application for the establishment of a public charter school for the sole purpose of, or with the purpose
Target
of,
only.
words to that effect.
Yeah, I mean, we don't have to change it. I just want to be clear on what I'm voting on. I mean, I'm not an advocate for using this language. I'm not an advocate for concentrated at-risk schools in our current system, and I wouldn't be an advocate for concentrated at-risk schools if we were going to issue a charter. So if we deem that strong middle-class schools are a good thing if you are within the system, I would think we would advocate similarly if somebody was going to come forward with a charter and to have language in here that would, in my view, deny that. Don't understand why we would do that. But I don't have any substitute language at this time. I just want to make sure what I'm voting on.
Right, and now keep in mind, one, that this is the existing policy. And so to do anything different, one, we would have to either repeal or revise this policy, or we would tonight simply be leaving the policy as it is. And again, I think we understand the spirit of this piece, especially 2 double I there. It's simply so that we don't have these charters established, scraping the cream from the top, so to speak. I mean, that's the spirit of it. And that's why policy review is important, because as it is established under one board, the language and the meaning is very clear. Several years later, another, 14 eyes are looking at it, and perhaps it's not as clear. So tonight our decision centers around the main decision, either adopting VSBA's recommended revisions or leaving our policy as it is. The recommendation from the administration is that we would leave the Norfolk policy as it is right now.
May I ask one more question?
Oh, certainly, yes.
The procurement piece, I'm not sure what the logic would be in not having the charter procure the Virginia State.
Frankly, I'm not sure either.
procurement.
That's what the General Assembly.
Oh, that's part of their
Yeah,
rule?
it's from the statute.
Okay.
I guess, to give a break.
Right. And the people funding for special ed, they talk about proportionate funding, and I guess I was wondering, and maybe based on the conversation, it doesn't really matter because we can say yes or no and determine what that means, but it obviously would cost way more to have a child with severe cognitive and whatever disabilities, and it would cost to have a child with a learning disability, so I didn't know what proportionate that actually is, sort of the gist of
That's
it.
taken from the statute as well. I
Okay.
think the idea there is just that if the charter school, whatever whatever money that goes with the students that come to the charter school would go with them.
Right.
Um,
Unless the charter school is cheaper, which is a weird thing to say too
Yeah.
in the statute. But, okay, so if that's what it says, I don't like it any better than I did. I can live with it.
Okay. Any opposition to leaving our policy as it is?
I have difficulty
Okay.
voting in support of the policy as it is, but I don't.
But it already exists.
Well,
I'm not trying to be
I know,
funny.
but you're asking me to. I wasn't there at the
So the
time,
vote
right?
would be not to accept the VSBA's recommended revision.
Oh, okay. Well,
I mean, that's in
Okay.
essence what
Well,
we would be
then-
doing, because the
then-
policy exists as it
If
is
he wants to go
written.
back and revisit.
well, I will come back and
it,
ask that we revisit
Okay,
that language then.
Okay.
Yeah.
but
Actually, Mr. Chairman, if we take no action, then we've done it, we just keep it like it is.
you're absolutely right. And that's the same for the first one as well.
I was going to say, it does require action, though, because what you've got is...
To make your improvements.
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Right.
Using
It's a mixture.
Sorry. Thank you.
So you have updates from the state code that it's being recommended that we adopt.
Okay.
Within that, we're also including this language around the existing policy.
And so there's new language that uses.
No, I'm just saying that if we're gonna, I think right now the plan is to put it on the consent agenda, right?
Correct.
So I'm just asking, can we move it off the consent agenda so I can vote nay?
We can. Okay. Now, I want to be really clear on the motion, because if there's some revision that has already taken place with the recommendation, and it's not adopting the entire VSBA's recommended revision, just some minor updates that has been made by Mr. Cloud. Are we all clear on that?
Yes.
Just make sure. We're looking at Policy Review LC, and it has amendments to it under Section C, first paragraph, second paragraph, which brings it up to state code that says at least one half of the public charter schools within the division shall be for at-risk students.
Right.
And then I think the rest of it is mostly
Spelling.
spelling.
Yeah.
So I'm just simply saying that I'm not supportive of the idea of schools that are just for at-risk students, whether they are charter or whether they are within our system, so I can't support that.
Not
That's all.
half. It says at least half. That's what this says. At least one half.
Yeah, so that means half of.
It's the whole
I just-
school, it's
yeah.
just half of the whole school.
Right. Okay.
That's all.
Would you accept a motion to, separate from the consent agenda at this time, to accept the amendments or improvements by Mr. Cloud for the existing charter school policy?
I would, and I think that would make things a lot easier than coming back trying to reword it in the formal
Yeah.
meeting.
And I'd like to make that motion at this time.
Okay. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Any discussion?
Is that when you want to further state that?
You want to restate that for me?
Okay.
I think Mr. Jordan is already
The
stated.
motion is that we would accept it with the revisions made by Mr. Cloud.
And we're going to vote on it now rather than wait for the consent agenda.
Yes.
Because we have.
So
Right.
that would give you the opportunity to formally say what you've already said. You may not want to say it again.
I will.
We would hope that you would want to.
At every up.
Okay, so is there discussion, or are we ready to vote? I mean, you certainly made your point. All right, are we ready to vote? All in favor, let it be known by saying aye.
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 You prefer a roll call? Okay. Ms.
Dr.
Banks?
Houston?
Aye.
Dr. Robinson?
Aye.
Dr. Gabriel? Reverend Haywood? Mr. Jordan?
Just want to be clear that I support the updates that we
Sure.
have to adopt because the Virginia Code says we have to
Right,
adopt them.
right.
But I disagree with the language that suggests that we should create at-risk charter schools, or that we should deny families the opportunity to choose if they happen to have a high-performing student. So I'm voting nay.
Okay. All
It's
right.
still reflected as a no.
Yes. I just want to be clear why.
Dr. Stewart?
Aye.
Dr. Thompson?
Aye.
Okay, motion carries. Thank you very much. I would like to go ahead and do the same for the other policy rather than having it on consent agenda. Yes. And of course, that would simply be leaving the policy as is.
May I make that motion at this time?
Please.
So moved. You got it, Ms. Banks?
I'll second.
You know what I said,
I'll
right?
second.
Thank you so much.
Properly moved and seconded that we would leave policy, that's GDB, GDPD as is. Ms. Banks?
Thank you. Dr. Houston?
Aye.
Dr. Robinson?
Aye.
Dr. Gabriel? Reverend Haywood?
Aye.
Mr. Jordan?
Aye.
Dr. Stewart?
Aye.
Dr. Thompson? Thank you.
Motion carries. Thank you very much. Okay. Thank you, Dr. Birdsong. Thank you, Mr. Cloud, for your work on these matters.